Talk with BJ, the podcast where trial attorney and legal commentator BJ Bernstein and her guests discuss the latest issues from around the legal world. BJ is a frequent commentator on television and radio. She's unique in that she not only comments on legal issues, having been lead counsel on numerous high-profile cases of national interest, but her relatable personal style allows the viewer to understand the law behind the headlines and why it's important. Now, here's your host, BJ Bernstein.
Welcome to Law Talk with BJ. I have returned with my awesome guests, 3 college students, Christy, Audrey, and Chris. 2 are students at Georgia State University and 1 at the University of Virginia. And if you haven't listened to the other episode, we're going to just keep on with our conversation. And if this is your first one, you can go back. It doesn't require independently listening. But this episode, we're going to really talk about a legal toolkit for college. You know, your parents pack you up. They send you with the proper bedding for your twin bed and all the things, especially for the females, to make it decorated the way you want, have everything that you need, give you the amount of money you need if they, and some basics. But no one, I don't really think, gives you a legal toolkit. Anyone arguing with me about how much legal information you were provided as you start your college journey?
Definitely. I don't think there was a lot of talk about how to protect ourselves legally if something were to happen in college. I think it was all about just protecting yourself, like, personally. Say, if something happens to your stuff, if your stuff gets damaged, what happens if, you have a police encounter, and if you're doing drugs and alcohol on campus. We don't really know. We're not prepared for that. And I think that's definitely something that should be taught to incoming freshmen.
Audrey, any preparation that you had?
I agree with that. I mean, I remember right when we moved in, we had a program. UVA has something called Red Dot and Green Dot. If somebody's being aggressive towards you or treating you in a way you wouldn't like, they're a red dot, which is like a threat. And somebody who would step in and help you defend yourself is called a green dot. So I remember we went to a huge gymnasium, sat, listened to a talk, and that was pretty much all we got.
Green dot, red dot, which was there any constructive discussion of what's legal and not legal, or just whatever pushes the dot and puts you in the, away from green, moving you from red to green?
I don't remember much talk about legality when I moved in, except for my RA. I remember her telling me that fake IDs are a felony, and that's the legal extent that I got.
There you go. All right, Chris, what about you?
Aside from the knowledge that I had before getting to college or going to college, it wasn't any information on how to deal with problems in college as it pertains to law and what to do if you were caught in a problem. Or caught with, a misdemeanor charge or what have you. I think that one thing that is big that they don't teach to students in college is if they do have an encounter with the police, how to go about reacting in the situation, how to address the officer, how to de-escalate the situation so that it doesn't appear that they're coming off aggressive, because officers are trained to come off initially aggressive because they're the ones that's on defense. So I think that it's not enough information on that topic. But as far as knowing about how to deal with things legally, I wasn't really educated coming to college. It was more so me knowing how to deal with it before.
And in terms of education of what's legal and not legal in the state that you are in, where you're going to college, I mean, obviously they're obvious ones. I mean, you don't stab anybody, you don't kill anybody, but, we know from campus issues that happens on campus. I mean, anything on rules or laws that could potentially get you arrested?
There was one thing, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, because at our freshman orientation, I remember they brought out police officers, Atlanta police officers. And one thing that stood out to me was they were like, and it scared me, like it would happen to me, but I don't do this. They were like, make sure you don't jaywalk, because they've watched people get run over at 30 miles per hour and like they died or something like that. That was like really something they were like, don't jaywalk, look both ways before you cross the road. That was the only thing that really.
Which is important because you're in a city campus, and if you watch how people in Atlanta drive, and right now add to it, when you were not a freshman, now there are these e-scooters and e-bikes, and there's all other forms of transportation zipping around your campus. And actually, the law hasn't even gotten its arm fully around that, not just in Atlanta and other cities and other campuses, about how to deal with these and conflicts with cars and incidents and accidents and injuries. So that's an important thing to discuss. But, again, as a lawyer, and I look back on my life, it's bewildering that we don't have a legal toolkit. And so on the legal toolkit, and join in if you have some ideas as we're talking, as we're saying things. But I'm going to start with the basic one is, let's say you are arrested and you need to call a lawyer. Who are you going to call? Who are you going to call? And it's, I can put the Ghostbusters music in, but who are you going to call, and how, maybe should you have that already in place a little bit of, or knowing where to go to get legal help, or has your campus said to you, there is a place here to get started on campus?
I don't think that they tell us know a lawyer just in case something happens. I remember I was close to campus and my car got booted. And I was so angry because I had just walked across the street and I wanted to take legal action, because I get really angry in situations like this. And I was like, I need to call a lawyer. So I started calling a bunch of lawyers. So I think a simple Google search will get you the information you need if you ever need an attorney on campus, because I also got into a car accident on campus. I got rear-ended. And it ended up being like a police car, not a police officer. It was a police officer, but it was an unmarked car that rear-ended me. So I don't think that, it's the campus's duty to tell you
No, not which lawyer. But I mean, do you think, though, that as you're preparing for school, that your parents or somebody may need to say, you know what, just in case, we've already looked into it, or here's a name, or here's an organization, or you have some concept of the process, the legal process?
I believe that that's very important. I think that I've known friends that have said that they've had a family attorney and have went through scenarios where they needed an attorney, and the fact that they've had one has helped them to come out better than somebody who wouldn't have not had an attorney and a designated attorney for the family. So I think that their parents, students' parents, telling them that this is the number to call is very important. But I also think that I'm not sure if this is already in place, but I think that having a campus attorney or a few designated campus attorneys would be great, because there are a lot of cases and crimes that go on just in college campuses, and that's considered a section of a different world. So for you have the college campuses, the life of that, and then you have the outside the college campus. So I think that having attorneys that deal with crimes that go on in the college campus life would be very beneficial for students and for staff as well.
Any other thoughts on that one for our toolkit, or let's put something else in our toolkit? What else would you want to know more about?
Well, I think drinking's definitely a tricky subject, especially on campuses, because you have authority figures telling you one thing, all of your peers are doing another. So you kind of have to feel things out for yourself, decide how serious they are and what repercussions you might face.
Right. And the one thing is, you could say, well, I'm going to get a possession of alcohol, which is like a misdemeanor charge. And depending on what location your school is, they may do it as a city ordinance. And a city ordinance violation tends not to be on your criminal record, but you're paying a fine. But you can be arrested, just for being intoxicated in public alone. Being a minor in possession. And reality is this, again, there is a lot of alcohol on campus, and it's almost like the luck of the, from above, a hand comes down and grabs you on the head, and and you're the one who arrested, and all the people at the football game who smuggled in alcohol in there. I think it used to be when I was younger, there was plastic bags, and when you would, because they quit letting you have bottles where men would slip it in their socks, and you would put the alcohol in a plastic bag and then put it in the front of your shoe. Is that so gross? I mean, I think about it now. But, that desperate to get alcohol to be able to drink at a football game, when we know that is illegal. And, that brings up another discussion of, are the laws really realistic with what our society does? And we're just putting at risk, are we putting at risk young people of having violations of the law that everyone is doing? It's a catch-22, but, would having at least the basics to know whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, if there's a situation of a difference between buying it for other people. And then the other part is realizing the liability civilly if you're sued. For instance, when you're a drunk driver and if you hurt someone, then you're going to get sued and a judgment can follow you for a very long time because people buy insurance. It may not be enough insurance to cover how serious injury is. The law will set a certain amount of insurance that you need to buy, but that's nearly not enough to cover someone if, God forbid, something happens to you. Are those things that that's just too much to hear, or you would like to say, you know what? I could use a sheet of paper that says in the state of Georgia, in the state of Virginia, in the state of California, or Iowa, or wherever I'm going to school, these are the laws and the potential penalties.
Yeah, I think it's a shame that most college students are not aware of what could happen to them legally if they get caught drinking and doing drugs or bringing stuff that they shouldn't be bringing to places. So I think that they should implement something where it's like a freshman seminar or something like that, where they just tell you, here's what can happen if you do this. Here's how much time you can serve if you are caught with this, and that. I think that would be a good deterrent, but I don't think that would.
It would not solve it all. I mean, I'm not naive about that part. I can even say that up front. I mean, we have a clash between what people do and what the law says. It's the problem when the law kicks in and where you are. Because let's say you're going to school in metropolitan Atlanta and then you drive to rural Georgia because you and your friends decide you're going to go up to the mountains for the weekend or head to the coast. And then you get arrested in rural Georgia, who, it's one thing in the city of Atlanta if you have a little bit of marijuana. And it's another part if you're in South Georgia and let's throw in race, and you get pulled over and next thing you know, you're facing something far more serious.
Yeah, it's diversity in each law, which is why I think that a document based on where that student attends school is very necessary. Because like you just said, if you go to a different area, their listing of crimes is different. A list of crimes is different than it is in the area previously. So I think that that's very important. And they give us various amount of documents when we come into a campus. I mean, we get documents on a syllabus, on a course, or what we need to do to successfully pass a course. So I don't think it would be that much of trouble for a university to print out these documents full of laws that's in that area for the students to have. And if after that point, it's on the student. I mean, you're going to have good and bad individuals in any way. So you're going to have people who are going to abide by the laws. You're going to have individuals who choose to, even if they have the law right in front of their face, to not follow it. And it's on them to, after they get the information, to read the information, because that's after that, they can't blame anybody but themselves. But I think that until they have that in place, it's still more so on the university to educate these students.
So part of freshman orientation and possibly even a course at some point on some of the basics. And I mean, I will say this, it's almost, I hate to use it this way, but citizenship training to a certain extent, that bridging the gap from being a young person and definitely a minor to turning 18, and under the law, you have a lot of responsibilities. The fact that you need insurance on your car is not your parents' duty. That is yours, legally, in the sense of, as you're driving the car and you have to have the proof of insurance, that's you who are making sure. There's a lot put on you at 18 that you're not necessarily prepared for. So perhaps, adding those layers, but realizing at the same time that we are in a world where your idea of what should be legal and someone who's 60's idea of what should be legal are incredibly different, and the law mirrors more what someone who's 50 or 60 believes, as we see changes. Makes sense. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about in terms of when you're on campus, and we talked about safety in the last episode some, but we didn't talk about sexual assault. And that's a very difficult topic, but one that is very much needed to be spoken about and part of it. So first of all, when you first started college or at any point in your college career, was there any discussion about what's legal and not legal in terms of sex, and how to be safe as you're dealing with someone and dealing with potential sexual harassment or sexual assaults on campus?
I think that was a cliche phrase that was used to start a movement, the say no phrase. We've all heard that from a younger age, but there wasn't a detailed description of what that actually means.
You mean say no to sex?
Well, say no if somebody, or not necessarily say no, excuse me, if somebody says no, that means no. And that's a phrase. And so it's more so, okay, no. But it's not, there wasn't a list of what could happen, or emphasis on the law of what could happen if that person persists. And then also, I think that it wasn't a as far as the what no meant or what harassment means, because I think that there are a lot of people who are doing it and they know that they're doing a wrong to a person, or they're harassing them. But then there's some phrases that could be said that based on the culture or previous culture that wasn't wrong at the time is now wrong, because and so that's it could be deemed as harassment, and these individuals would know that it's very serious. The topic of sexual harassment and rape is very serious. They go hand in hand. But I think that it's very important that, because, for example, you had Freaknik one time in Atlanta.
Right. Atlanta was a huge festival that it's made a comeback.
But it's more of a family-friendly comeback. They have a concert.
I remember in the old days, and I lived in Midtown Atlanta, and I was like, there were a lot of cars and a lot of people and major partying right in the middle of Peachtree Street in Atlanta.
Right. And
wait, but how do you know? You're too young for this. You were told about it.
No, I'm a little bit before your time.
No way, man. Go ahead.
But I think that it was more people said it was rape culture. Rape culture was born then, and the act of grabbing a man grabbing a female's parts, a woman's parts was. I'm not saying it's acceptable, but then it was more so, okay, it's happening. And so then it wasn't.
Because of the partying.
Right, because the atmosphere. There's
some idea of partying, atmosphere, a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs. Everybody was in and out of their cars. There were thousands of people. And, but
it's still wrong.
Right. No. It was wrong then. It's wrong now.
It's wrong now.
But there's a perception, and let's be honest. I mean, between music, film, everything, we are bombarded with these images and these things, and it's contradictory to what maybe feels right for a particular person. It's an assumption that is okay with you. And it hasn't left. And it hasn't left.
It has not left. So that's why we still have people who think that it's okay to do that now. But if there was a system put in place to assure them that no, this is not okay.
Education,
dealing, and that's where
dealing with sexual issues and the legal sexual issues, because your parent, everybody's afraid to talk about it. I mean, we'll sing about it, we see movies about it, but we actually don't have conversations, and certainly your parents. Don't, and they don't know necessarily they think of the atmosphere that they had versus the atmosphere you have now.
It's completely different. And sex is on the topic of sex, and the act of sex is more prevalent in today's society than it was then, and we have different cultures, various cultures of LGBTQ, those communities. But I think that they do a job of bringing up, they bring up the idea of safe sex. And they place a lot of emphasis on giving out free condoms. I've been to colleges where you can walk into the dorm hall or where you go to get your room keys, and there's a bin where they would keep peppermints in, and they have condoms in it.
Exactly.
But they don't give you a pamphlet that says, okay, now you got your condoms here, but this is the laws of what happens if you don't follow through. If somebody says that this is wrong, or gives you a list of what sexual harassment is or what that is, but then again, it's very subjective depending on the persons that are involved in the act. One person may say that this is sexual harassment and that I'm very harassed at this point, but then somebody else may say that it's not. So that's a very touchy topic to try to tackle because it's subjective. But I think that if there's a basis on what sexual harassment is, and even just from the smallest thing to a word or somebody touching somebody else and inappropriately, we can work towards eradicating the problem. But until then, it's just going to keep going. That rape culture, which was not dealt with during the time, it's just going to keep happening.
And I'll just say this, just historically, because of my age. Yes, there was Freaknik, but long before and forever, it seems like, going back, even before my time.
Right.
It may not have been that party, but there was something that happened, whether it was at a fraternities and sororities. We're seeing a lot of changes there. I've represented some young women dealing with those issues and what happens and the assaults that happen while that type of partying is going on. So it's not just limited to that and has been there for a very long time. Christy, you're looking at me like you're dying to tell me something.
I just think the extent to colleges telling you about sex on campus is just, here, take a condom, make sure you use a condom. It's almost like they're urging you to have
engage.
Sex.
Exactly.
So, but if you're going to urge people by giving them condoms to protect themselves, you also need to tell them about how to protect themselves against violence in the sexual realm of things. Like, there's a lot of college campus events that happen that are orchestrated by the campus that a lot of students go to. So it's large groups of people. They can be, the students can be coming drunk, high, and they can also be on like a social high where they are around their friends and they think they're, up here, like on another level. So they can be inappropriately touching women, and a lot of bad things can happen in those situations. And I just think it's important for men and women, because men and women do experience, sexual assault in many different ways. It's important for them to know that there are people to talk to about it and to get the person who is offending them, into the proper judgment that they need. Because I think a lot of people that experience sexual assault are scared to reach out to someone and tell them what happened to them or what's happening to them. But I think that there's a lot of counseling on campus that they should go to if they've ever experienced sexual assault. And it can also happen with teachers or professors and stuff like that. Like, God forbid that happens. But, don't be afraid.
But professors can take an interest in you. And I didn't have anything inappropriate, but I remember at one point, the professor, let's have lunch. And I was like, at first you're like flattered because I'm such a good student and I love my topic or whatever. And then you're like, oh, maybe this is a little weird.
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't normal, because your intellectual side is totally excited about this professor. It's your favorite class and they want to talk to you further about your paper or whatever. And the next thing you know, you're like, wow, that's 2 times going to lunch with them. That's weird.
I've seen stuff like that in school where I've had professors talk to students and it made me feel uncomfortable. I wasn't even the student he was talking to. Like, I've been in situations like that where I'm like, wow, like if I were that girl, I'd feel uncomfortable in this situation. So I think that it is important, if you feel uncomfortable with a professor or a teacher, try to seek out to your, advisor, say, I want to change classes, but I don't know, like, I know that's just like GSU, that they just say, protect yourself using condoms, but like what do you guys do, like in your university? Like, is it just condoms and just protect yourself?
We have the same thing. I remember that there was a box of condoms in the hallway of my dorm for the whole year. And we had that green dot talk that kind of also applied to, sexual assault if somebody's pursuing you in a way that you do not want to be pursued. But besides that, we had the constant presence of condoms, and that was about
And
it.
condoms are important skipping everybody's judge. Again, you get into all these things when we're on a podcast about people's idea of when you should have sex and what context. But the realization over the years of 1, birth, 2, health. The spread of STDs and other things are very serious. HIV, incredibly, and probably one of the main driving forces in condom availability for students and protection in that way. But I'm sitting here listening to y'all, and I'm a little bit shocked that there's not more discussion of the basics. And I think I should already know this in some ways, but I'm not on campus like you are.
I think that a lot of it's a bit antiquated because there were issues with older generations, like with the spread of STDs. And so that's why we have condoms. But I don't think universities have completely caught up with, issues like sexual assault and rape.
Although are there any discussions of, what Title IX does in reporting and how the school is to react, or anything with regard to that you've heard of in your experiences?
Title IX?
Yeah.
What is Title IX?
See, there we go. All right. I'm going to have another podcast on this for sure, because there are, a whole structure of things of when you are the victim of violence on campus, and particularly sexual violence, and laws that apply and potential lawsuits with regard to sexual violence and reporting and what's to be done. And a little bit akin to with child molestation over the years, it's changed where if a child is at school and talks about being assaulted, then that triggers mandated reporting and an investigation occurs so that you find out that a child has been assaulted. So something akin to that, and way more than we can get into now. But I got to say, I'm a little shocked that there's not more. Because I know there are lawyers who specialize it. I know that there, particularly in fraternities and sororities, there have been a number of lawsuits across the country where you have parties and you're providing alcohol, and at those parties, someone is incredibly drunk and is sexually assaulted. And that becomes part of the culture of, it turns out that the fraternity is potentially trying to specifically entice certain women there and intentionally giving certain amounts of alcohol in order to be able to have sex, believing that it's consensual. But there's an argument to be made that when you're intoxicated, you may not be able to have the ability to fully consent, or the question of force, force under the law. For rape, again, many states define it differently, but it's not just holding a gun or a knife to you. Physical threats and different forms of force can be sufficient under the law to convict you of rape, and with very serious consequences, such as, mandatory minimums of 25 years in prison. So it's clear that is news to y'all, and that is something that we will cover in the future. I'm so glad we talked about this one. And but anything else in terms of that you can think of now that you feel like in this area, in terms of interpersonal relations with your classmates, that you wish schools would do better on for your safety, whether it's sexual safety or physical safety?
I think mainly being able to know how to deal with the officers on campus. I think that there are officers who profile individuals, and they're a little bit more aggressive towards those individuals than they would be the general public. But I think that the media makes it easier for those officers to be questioned and judged now, because there have been various videos that have surfaced of past scenarios. Now, whether or not those officers were sentenced correctly or dealt with correctly is still a question to be answered, because we've seen plenty of officers get off after they've used brutal force and were more aggressive than they should have been, and didn't follow through with the steps. Officers have steps of what they're supposed to go through. They're supposed to be pepper spray, there's supposed to be nightstick or nightstand, and then it's supposed to be gun. But we've seen officers go past that based on certain scenarios where they were wrong, and videos have surfaced to show that they were wrong.
And shootings.
Right,
and
and
different-
shootings. But I think that before it gets to that level, there have been instances where people were stopped and they came at the officer instead of just complying and playing the game to get to the court, to be able to argue effectively. And I think that that's a topic that most individuals coming to college, if they didn't have parents who were able to tell them that, then they won't be able to know how to deal with those situations. I've been stopped 5 times, and 3 of those times were late night. Like, I'm talking about 2 in the morning.
On campus or just
around campus, and then just in general. And I'm still sitting here today. And so it's...
So you feel like, how did you know to deal with your interactions with the officers? Because, I know with officers, it can escalate very quickly.
Right.
Because one, depending on what their time of day,
Mm-hmm.
where it is, then what neighborhood it is. In other words, are they particularly in their mind already in a high crime area, so they're already more alert? Then there's profiling, racial profiling, all kinds of different profiling that's alleged. But again, do you think that there's something looping back to the school that you could learn more in terms of helping you to deal with that?
Of course. And me personally, I've learned some information depending on the professor that I've had with my courses. But that's only because I'm
studying criminal justice.
Exactly.
And you have one of your professors I know
Right,
well and watches out for y'all like a hawk, I think.
Right. He has some great nuggets he gives us at times. Most times. I've enjoyed his class thoroughly. But I believe that the way that I was able to deal with those situations was because my parents always told me, yes, sir, no, sir, officer. Comply, keep your hands where you can see, where the officer can see them, and just follow what he says, and until everything is finished. Once it's finished, then if you were wrong, if you feel like you weren't wrong and they stopped you, if you have footage, evidence, then you can argue it in court. But if you are aggressive from when they come to the car or from when the interaction starts, these things escalate depending on which part of the world you're in, and you may not be able to argue in the courts. And the majority of these officers get off because, number one, the court system is biased. And then 2, I believe there's not a witness, the victim, besides the video footage. That some of these officers, there was video footage and they still got off. So that just shows the system's wrong. But I think that if you're not there, it's hard to prove that you were handled wrong. And so it's mainly about being compliant, and waiting until you can get to the courts to argue effectively, because in the moment the officer is the person that's gonna have the last word. So it's always about and then, like I said, they're taught when they come to the car to be aggressive. Officers are not. If they were taught to come and be, oh, hey, how you doing, sir? They're on the defensive. They're stopping you in the middle of the night or in the daytime. They're walking up to your car. They're taught to come that way. But the majority of officers I've dealt with, after they realized I was going to be compliant and listen, not be a pushover, but still be compliant and listen, then they more all the time they've easily calmed down. And I've even gotten off a few times because of my attitude towards them. Now, the majority of times I haven't, but I've had scenarios with the cops and I've still here. Now, I'm not to say that other individuals have done the right thing and still been done wrong. And that's, once again, a biased system. But for me, I think that it's more about compliance and education about knowing how to deal with these situations.
So were you like being stopped in a car, or like when you were walking by police?
I was stopped in the car, mostly.
So do you think like it's important to know your rights in that situation?
That's true as well.
And I will say this to everybody. Clearly, and a lot of things you're talking about are in the realm of racial profiling. But stepping back even further, the car, I always say to anybody with a car, like, make sure your car is in perfect functioning order. Make sure your tags are right, your tail light's not out. All those things, regardless. I had a tail light out and I got a ticket recently. I just paid it. But I also wasn't facing the same thing because I'm a 55-year-old white woman driving around,
Right.
I don't have them on guard. But even I know, in terms of when the officer approaches, I have my hands on the steering wheel where they can be able to see them even, as they approach, that I'm not making any sudden moves. A lot of people think they're doing the right thing getting out of the car immediately, and that's actually the worst thing you can do at that point. You're supposed to stay in the car. So they can come up and approach you. And then if you don't have your driver, I don't keep my driver's license right next to me. But if I'm leaning to, let's say my purse has hit the floorboard, I may say, officer, I need to get my driver's license. It's in my purse that's down here. I'm going to lean over and get it. Because again, you don't want sudden moves, and it's sad that we're at the state that we have to do that. But at the same time, anything can go wrong, and you don't want it to, and then you're trying not to have a ticket if you have done something wrong, and in your instance, as you're talking about, I hear it clearly from you. It is a very deep part of, I want to be safe and I want to be alive,
Right.
because these people have guns and I do not. Or even if you do have a gun, then that's the other thing is, and it's legal. If it's illegally being carried gun, are you going to alert them to that? And then how do they react to that? Those are all things to consider. Christy, you're looking at me.
Oh,
taking it all in.
Because if a police is stopping, you said, don't get out of your car. But I've seen a lot of videos where police are opening the car by themselves and kind of telling you, come out. So do you lock your door? And if they try to unlock it, be like, oh, am I being arrested? Something like that.
I mean, that's a good question. I have the exact scenario I can't say, but I just know in general, most of the time they're not pulling you unless you're a suspect for something else. If they think there was an armed robbery down the street, then they're pulling you up fast if you fit the description of the car or whatever. But normally, I always think of just staying put where I am. And definitely not getting out, because if you get out, then they can't. You're not in a contained place, and I think you put them on guard if you just jump out. That's my general assessment of it. And if you think about it, not in terms of law enforcement, take a step back. If you're at a parking at a grocery store and you're in the lot and you see somebody that bothers you, and you start to see them get out, you're staying in your car till you feel like they've moved away and not going to cause you a problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what's hard is, your fear that is based on real things that can happen, but it doesn't happen every day. But when it happens, it's really bad, and so having to be on guard all the time is exhausting. I don't have an easy answer to that yet. I don't think we're there that way in our society, and what you have to experience versus what Audrey and I have to experience are totally different. Or our Hispanic friends, now there's a whole nother thing of, immediately assuming because you're Hispanic that you may be here illegally, and being on guard with that. So there are all these layers that we're dealing with in society that have super serious consequences, which is why I think we're back to what the theme of this is if your school isn't going to do it, perhaps you need to as well, is to have a plan. Hoping that you never need that plan, but having one and realizing that the innocence of the college years that we have nostalgia about may not really be fully what's there. I mean, there's some wonderful things that y'all have all had, I know, wonderful times and good friends in these years that you've been in college. But then you've had these moments where, as you talked about, a concern that there's a shooting and that there's a lockdown. That is something that your generation is experiencing at a level that none of us could have anticipated, and that you need to know about it. But rather than be disillusioned by it completely, I think it's starting honest talk, which y'all have all participated in today, and I am grateful for. And so as we come to a close from this episode, I want to just mention the T that I suggest to drink. Everybody has different ideas about how to drink tea. I think this may be an older person thing with the hot tea. So I'm enjoying a butterfly pea flower tea that I chose because it gives you a sense of calm and anti-stress. So maybe I'll pack this up for you for your exams during the year. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast is not to be construed as legal advice. With any legal issue, you should reach out to a professional attorney that practices law in the state and area of law for which you need information or consultation. Law Talk with BJ does not establish an attorney-client relationship, which is only formed when you have hired an attorney and signed an engagement agreement or contract. It's Law Talk with BJ music theme written and produced by Atlanta Audible. This podcast copyright 2018, BJ Bernstein, Esquire.